Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Marine Biologist Deep Dive. My name's Guy Baker and I'm the editor of the Marine Biologist magazine. Before we dive into these chilly waters, I'd like to introduce our guests this morning. We're delighted to be joined by Maria Gavrilo of the Association Maritime Heritage Russia and leader of the Open Ocean Project. So Maria will be talking about the study and conservation of Arctic marine heritage. And her article describes the Open Ocean Project, which was dedicated to the forgotten British polar explorer Benjamin Lee Smith. We're also joined by Claire Mahaffey, Professor of Ocean Science in the Department of Earth, Ocean and Ecological Sciences at Liverpool University. And Claire's using novel techniques and approaches to understand how Arctic marine ecosystems are responding to environmental change. Obviously, that's a big question, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that. Last but not least, we are joined by Dr. Paul Mann of the Department of Geography and Environmental Sciences at Northumbria University. So Paul specialises in the big rivers of the Arctic and how the amount and type of carbon and nutrients that they supply to the Arctic Ocean food webs is changing as a result of global warming. And his approach has been likened to testing the blood of an organism to discover its overall health. I think, first of all, perhaps if I could ask Maria to give just a very sort of brief and personal introduction to the Arctic and Russian research. Maria, would that be okay?
Thank you very much. Good morning, or good day, good evening, whenever you are. Thank you very much for inviting me for this very special and I think important event. Yes, it's a bit difficult to introduce the entire Arctic or even Russian Arctic in a few minutes, of course. But I will try to do this using my personal experience. I have been working in the Arctic since 1985, when it was my first expedition to the high Arctic. It lasted for the 5 months. And I got amazing experience, and I felt, and since that time I got in love with the Arctic, and I try to come there every season, every summer. And I would confirm that Arctic is quite a huge region. It's a circumpolar region, and to my opinion, the uniqueness of the Arctic is that this polar region is unites the people living around the Arctic Circle and a little bit beyond, much more than any other natural zone. Because the people living in the Arctic, they look to each other faces across the Arctic Ocean. And this geographical position, it unites the people around the Arctic much more than those people who live, for example, in the forest belt of the planet. And at the same time, this geographical position leads us to understand that we have to cooperate in the Arctic, maybe more than in other regions, and we depend on each other. Each country facing to the Arctic depends or relates or linked to other Arctic country much more than those countries in other latitudes. Arctic is a big country. It's a very harsh country. It's all you know that it has quite a severe climate and ice covered, and it's a polar night over there. It's a place for the strong people, but at the same time, Arctic is a very fragile country. It's a unique country with it's not very as much diverse as in tropic on temporal latitude biodiversity, but it has its unique communities, endemic communities, which are dependent on this harsh environment. And these communities are very sensitive to the climate change and especially to the human disturbance. And this contrasting pattern of the Arctic makes its uniqueness as well. Russia is a huge country, and it has almost half of the coastline of the Arctic. And this, again, is a geographical fact. It poses the responsibility of the Russia for the almost half of the Arctic region. Russia has quite a long history of Arctic exploration, of polar exploration, and has some unique structures in the Arctic. We have the northernmost city beyond the Arctic Circle, which is the city of Murmansk. We have a well-known northern sea route, which connects the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean, and this is the shortest way between these two regions, but it's still going through the quite harsh environment and the difficult environmental condition, but it's blooming. And Arctic is the one of the, along with Antarctica, Arctic is the country or region which is much more rapidly changing. And now it's warming twice as faster than the global scale, and this environmental change affect both natural conditions, biodiversity, and human presence in this region. And from the position of the biodiversity and environment of the Arctic, I would like to say that this double stress from the rapid environmental change and much more rapid human advance to the Arctic pose the great risk to the Arctic biodiversity. And we all, Arctic countries and other countries in the world who deal with the Arctic, who explore Arctic one or another way, we have to take in consideration this special stress to the natural ecosystem, biodiversity, and environment. As I told you, Russia has a long tradition of Arctic exploration, and especially in scientific Arctic exploration. We have a tradition, for example, we have a tradition of studying of drifting ice, and in 1937, Soviet Union established the first scientific drifting station. In this era of drifting stations lasted until permanently until 1990s and continues until 2010, and until ice permitted. Now we continue to study Arctic using the ship-based expeditions which run every year. We have a network of land-based stations which operate, some of them operate permanently, like research station in the very center of Siberian high Arctic in Severная Zemля archipelago. But the Arctic is a huge country. It's a country of international cooperation, and we can understand the Arctic environment and process going there only when we can cooperate between other countries, and not only internally, but international cooperation makes Arctic more interesting, and we can we have to cooperate to understand and to preserve, to conserve Arctic biodiversity and environment. And I'm looking forward for the next 2 years, because Russia just takes a leadership in the Arctic Council in May, and the Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin just signed a concept of the Russian leadership in the Arctic Council and the action plan for this. And as far as I know, there are several mainstream objects on this leadership, and it includes problem of the special protected areas in the Arctic, the children in the Arctic, the indigenous people in the Arctic, and the some initiative of the conservation of Arctic flora and fauna, and especially, for example, the initiative of migrating birds. And migrating birds, I'm an ornithologist, so I'm easier to speak about Arctic in terms of my object with birds. And birds are the best linkage for the Arctic, between Arctic and other countries, because Arctic birds, they can spend winter even in Antarctica, so they spread all over the globe. And from the other hand, the birds, they link the people from different countries. And I'm looking forward that leadership of the Russian leadership in the Arctic Council will bring more opportunity to cooperate in the Arctic with other countries, and we can do some more interesting projects during this year and beyond. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you. That's it's great to hear about the Arctic Ocean and the Arctic region. I mean, it's you know, for personally for me, with my very kind of Europe-centric view, you know, the Arctic seems like the part that falls off the top of the map. But it's fascinating to focus on it, and I love your backdrop there with the ice and the huge expanse of land and the coastline in the background. It's great to really kind of focus on the Arctic as the center of the world, really, in many ways. And I just wanted to say there's a map in the new edition of the magazine. I'll put a link to it in a minute in the chat, so you can look, and it does actually, it's quite useful. I don't know if you love maps like I do, but it's nice to have maps to refer to when we're talking about things. So you might want to bring that up on your screen. Anyway, I'd like to turn now to a bit of the science that's being done, and ask Paul and Claire. The Arctic Ocean receives greater quantities of material from land than any other ocean. Paul, your research looks at how future changes in what's being fed into the Arctic Ocean from the land may affect marine food webs. And Claire, you've been tracing these chemical signatures from Arctic rivers into marine food webs. So I thought it'd be nice if you could tell us a bit about your projects, perhaps emphasizing how they connect and complement each other, and how they're helping to build a big picture of changing Arctic ecosystems.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Maria. That was a lovely kind of overview of the Arctic. A tough ask to do that. And yeah, Guy, thank you for introducing that. So yeah, my project is kind of upstream, I guess, looking at sort of the land and how that influences the coastal Arctic Ocean. That's called the Cocoon Project. And that's just one of 16 individual projects as part of a 5-year UK-German collaborative science project or program, and that's called the Changing Arctic Ocean program. And Claire's going to obviously talk about a separate project, but and we'll talk a little bit about how our projects link. And the program specifically pulls together projects that are aiming to obviously look at a changing Arctic Ocean, but particularly what implications those changes are going to have on marine biology and the cycling and biogeochemistry within the Arctic Ocean. So that's sort of the focus of the 16 projects. The project that I lead on, Cocoon, its main question is around how changes in the freshwater inputs coming into the Arctic Ocean and changes that are occurring on land, mainly the thaw of this very, very old ancient carbon sources that are on the land and on the cliff, and to some extent on the subsea as well. How changes to those, coupled with additional inputs for more and more fresh water being pumped into this already very fresh ocean, what impact that will have on coastal ecosystems. So I guess my project looks at the supply of materials from land to the ocean and how they may change in the future, and specifically how that may change the base of the food chain. So things like phytoplankton. And I guess that's a good time to hand over to Claire for her to explain her project.
Yes, Great, thank you, Paul. That was a nice lead in. And thank you, Maria, and also to Guy for the invitation today. And unlike Maria, I'm actually very new to working in the Arctic environment, and it's been an absolutely fascinating 4 years in leading the ARISE project. So bouncing off to where Paul got to, so when we think about the changing Arctic, one of the principal things we think about is the changing ice environment or the changing temperature. And the way that marine scientists actually detect those changes is typically using tools such as satellites, remote sensing, as well as deploying equipment in the ocean to measure temperature salinity. So we can actually observe long-term changes in the physical environment using these techniques. But one of the challenges we have in the Arctic is therefore, or in any environment, is actually detecting change within the ecosystems themselves. And certainly the Arctic presents a very significant challenge because the ecosystem itself is complex. There are many different layers within the Arctic ecosystem. The ecosystem is exposed to very strong seasonality, and also the organisms migrate, whether that be up and down in the water column or from region to region. So we know their physical environment has been changing, but we want to know how the changes in their physical environment is actually affecting the Arctic ecosystems themselves. So what we're doing in the ARISE project is deploying a suite of biomarker techniques. So these are things like stable isotopes, where we're actually trying to construct the food web in different regions of the Arctic. And we're able to do that because the phytoplankton that Paul just talked about represents the base of the food web. And then everything above, which actually relies on the phytoplankton for their energy source, has a change in the biomarker composition, and it's a predictable change. So using that, we can actually reconstruct a food web and think about quantitative properties such as the food chain length and also the trophic position of individual species, specifically in our case, marine predators. So what we want to do is to look at using these stable isotopes to actually figure out how these ecosystems have been changing, both in time and also in space. So one of the key things about these ecosystems is they're really inextricably connected. The base of the food web is connected to the top of the food web. So you can think about it kind of like as Cheerios on a piece of string. And once you start moving bits around, whether it be the one at the base of the food web or at the top of the food web, everything starts shifting. So on one end of ARISE, we're interested in the phytoplankton, and we're interested in how the environment is changing the phytoplankton, but also their biomarker composition. And one of our hypotheses is that riverine inputs or a change in the terrestrial inputs in the Arctic is adding nitrogen to the coastal regions, and therefore has the potential to affect the biomarkers in the baseline, which again, because of this link between the base of the food web and the higher food web, could actually alter the biomarkers within the food web itself. And so that's how our projects link, whereas Paul's looking at the kind of the land connection to the coastal environment. We're interested in what that material is coming down and how that may then actually alter the biomarkers within the food webs.
I think it's a fascinating balance, actually, and of course, so obviously the phytoplankton, and there's been quite a lot of reports suggesting and evidence to suggest that these coastal marginal oceans, because there's huge shelf regions in the Arctic Ocean, and the particular shelf region that we're looking at, and I think Claire has looked at to some extent, is this East Siberian shelf region, which is absolutely vast, and is marked nicely on the map in the article. So you can have a look at that. And so we're really looking at this area that is warming very, very rapidly, even for the Arctic. That's warming, and we're seeing these very dramatic changes on the landscape, ground collapse, changes to hydrology, how water flows over the land. And we know that's having an impact on inland waters. The question, I guess, we're all trying to track, Claire and myself, looking at these kind of interlinks, is that yet playing out in the coastal ocean, and also what might happen in the future. So some of the stuff we've been doing, for instance, is not just looking at, so what we've been doing on the ground is spending a lot of time in Siberia. So we go to Siberia, we fly there with all our kit. Thankfully, we managed to get our field work done pre-COVID, and we got out there with all of our gear. Huge requirement for international collaboration for these types of work, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment. But so really what we did is just these series of very long transects down these Arctic rivers. And if you look at your map, you'll see these two rivers. The ones we studied were the Kolyma River, which is the largest river catchment that's underlain by permanent permafrost. And then the Lena River, which is an even bigger river, which I talk about a little bit in the article. And so we did these transects down the river to sort of look at what happens once this material goes into the river. What happens to it as it's being transported to the coastal Arctic Ocean, and can we see any evidence of this very old carbon coming out that's been locked away for thousands of years? Can we see that in the carbon, and can we see that in the nutrients that are coming out into the, well, I guess, fueling the base of the food chain in the coastal ocean? And at the same time, the way we've been trying to get at that is doing all of these experiments. So we collect all of these waters over the entire season. So we have an open water season when the rivers unlock, when the ice breaks up, as we can see behind Maria. Once you get that period of time, we capture the water and then we take it back to labs in Germany, Russia, or the UK. And then we would analyze them. And then what we're trying to do is run a series of model scenarios for what will happen under future kind of conditions. So we know the Arctic is going to continue to warm. We know already from records for decades back that the amount of fresh water from land to the ocean is increasing. And so we're going to run a series of scenarios to sort of say, how will the supply of carbon, water, nutrients to the Arctic Ocean change? And at the moment, we're seeing some really interesting evidence. So we are getting more nutrients being exported, but we're also seeing big changes to the environmental conditions. So for instance, it's changing the light field. We're moving more brown water, if you like, from your rivers into the Arctic Ocean coast. And that can actually have the opposite effect. It can block light penetrating into the ocean, and that reduces the growth of phytoplankton. And increases respiration, so the breakdown of this material into greenhouse gases that can go into the atmosphere. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Claire.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, actually. I've got lots of questions for you now, Paul. But just following on the thread that Paul was talking about how we actually do this research, obviously, Paul's emphasized the fact that, this Arctic research is incredibly challenging, remote, requiring lots of equipment. From the ARISE perspective, we have participated in 18 research cruises over 2 years, and those cruises include the Siberian Sea, along with collaborators in Stockholm in Russia, and also Barents Sea, the Fram Strait, and also over in the Chukchi and Beaufort Sea. And these cruises have been on lots of different ships, research vessels, both UK and international, as well as on commercial vessels as well. So again, the collaborations reach beyond the kind of academic community as well. And so what we've been doing is going on these cruises and actually sampling the phytoplankton at the base of the food web and also their nutrients to work out how the signals in the phytoplankton are changing in different Arctic regions. So the region that Paul was just talking about, the East Siberian Sea, is obviously very impacted by rivers. So that gives us an idea about how phytoplankton are responding to riverine inputs, and that's kind of one end member. Other parts of the Arctic will give us an indication of how the phytoplankton are responding to inputs from the Atlantic, such as in the Barents Sea. are inputs from the Pacific, such as in the Chukchi Sea. So then we can start to build up a picture of how changes in the water masses, changes in the nutrient inputs are actually affecting phytoplankton in these different Arctic regions. And then from that knowledge, we can build a picture of if, for example, as Paul says, the environment will change in the future, how will that base of the food web be altered by more Pacific water, more Atlantic water, more riverine water, etc. And so again, similar to Paul, all those samples are collected at sea, brought back to the laboratories, both in the University of Liverpool and also Edinburgh. And then we have a whole suite of technicians and very hardworking postdocs that spend lots of time analysing the samples to help build up the pictures that we're now looking at and interpreting as well.
Thank you.
I would like to add a little bit other view on the modern research. My colleagues, they demonstrate the use of the modern techniques and modern methodology, stable isotopes, and all these fine high-tech techniques. It's a huge progress in the science, of course, in the Arctic science as well, and we can retrieve some tiny process and the details and which we, of course, was not able to trace before. And this is the one aspect of the modern science. But at the same time, I would like to stress that traditional observation in traditional science, natural science, is still in power. And it's the best way, of course, to cooperate between traditional knowledge of scientist knowledge. And don't say about the indigenous people, it's other topic, but the classical observation on nature and the using of the modern techniques, this both only can give us a proper interpretation of the process. In this respect, I would like to also to stress the importance of early exploration of the Arctic. So this is more related to our study and to our article. So they look back to our to the early exploration and learning through their diaries, where they make their tiny notes. They can provide us with a huge scientific information even now, more than 100 years ago. For example, one of our hero of our project Open Ocean is a Benjamin Lee Smith, which is a largely forgotten British explorer who made 5 expeditions to the Arctic. He started in Svalbard, Spitsbergen, and then he had 2 expeditions to the Russian High Arctic, to the Franz Josef Land. This archipelago was discovered by Austrian-Hungarian expedition in 1873. Weyprecht and Peyer, they just discovered islands and described one corner of the big archipelago. And Benjamin Lee Smith was the second one who came to the area, and he described another part. So he was the very first person who was there, and he made his notes. And there are 2 reports onto the Royal Geographical Society after his expedition, and we have these reports available. And before to go to the Arctic, I always, and my colleagues, always read through the old materials, even not by the specialist. And in our case, for example, it's a very good example, I believe. We found in Benjamin Lee Smith's reports that they observed some animals, so they brought some first collection of the wildlife to the mainland, to the Western world, from Franz Josef Land, and they made the notes on in situ on observation. And they know that there is an ivory gull colony on the cliff somewhere in the part of the big fjord, Grey Fjord. And ivory gull is an Arctic endemic species, which is in decline now largely, and Russia holds the biggest world population of this species, and we are responsible for maintaining this population. And very difficult to study this bird because of the remote areas and very scarce data. In our expedition, we followed the path of the Benjamin Lee Smith. We visited the place he described. We took photos, and we can compare the landscape over the more than 100 years. And it was not era of the satellite images. And now, due to his pictures and his descriptions and our pictures, we can compare the changes in this high Arctic archipelago over the 100 years. And we came along his pathway, and after on the second season, we found the colony he described on Ivory Gull. And this is the largest in the world colony traced for the more than 100 years. That means that there are some places where the species still live as it lived more than 100 years ago. So I would like to stress that it's very important to look also behind us and to use information collected by the early expedition and to bring this knowledge to the modern science and the cooperation between countries, between people, and between times.
Thank you, Maria. I think that's a really good point. The sort of holistic approach, using all the information available at different levels. And struck by the difficulty of doing research in such a remote area, and I wonder if Claire and Paul have examples of how the collaboration with Russian researchers has helped their research.
Oh, well, it's hard to sort of talk about just one or two. I mean, in every single way, especially working in Russia, when you first go to Russia and you try and work in these places, you know, you're traveling. What we would be doing is we'd be stepping on really quite small vessels compared to what's used out in the open ocean, traveling out to the coast, and you are, you know, there is no RNLI, there is no, you know, so you're packing survival things with you in the front of the boat in case you get stuck, and you know, so you don't want to get stuck in Siberia without supplies. And so I think a lot of the things that I learned was just how as a group do they survive. It was often, you know, there were times when in the past, thankfully not during this project, that, you know, we've been caught in some really horrendous weather. And these rivers are so big that, you know, if the wind picks up, it's like being out in the ocean, and you're in a small boat. So I've been in circumstances where, you know, you're just totally stranded. You have to just stay there for the night. And in that case, you know, a couple of bottles of vodka and you know, finding a fishing hut, and you can just go in and make yourself at home and stay there, and they'll give you smoked fish, and they'll keep you warm, and so there's also the sort of social element, and sort of Russian science is done very hands-on and very, I don't know, takes a bit of practice on the land, that is. I don't know what you think, Claire, but I think that's absolutely key. The other thing is the Russian collaborations. One thing, sort of the experience of the landscape and how it's changing. That knowledge that Maria is talking about, that just gets handed down from people that live there. And the other one, I guess, is German colleagues as part of this project. So not necessarily Russians, but the Germans that are part of this program are absolutely essential. Key links to this, because they also have a lot of experience and work out there. So their knowledge of the logistics as well of building relationships with the Russians so that we can export and get samples moving between different countries has been key.
Thank you. Claire, did you have any specific examples, or shall we move on to the next question?
No, I guess within the ARISE project, we were very fortunate. One of our principal investigators based at the University of Manchester, Bart van Dongen, has fortunately had long collaborations with Russian scientists via also his collaborators in Stockholm. So I think his first expedition there was back in the late 1990s. And so that, you know, the fact that Bart was involved in ARISE and the fact that those collaborations and those dialogues were already happening actually made our collaborations really work well. And the fact that we were invited to participate in a research cruise to the Siberian Sea was absolutely fantastic. There was no other opportunities for us to get out to that part of the Arctic Ocean. And that was essential because there was no other research cruise that we had built into the ARISE project that actually included the impact of such large rivers and such significant rivers on the Arctic Ocean. So actually being able to sample in the coastal waters, receiving that freshwater input was absolutely essential for the ARISE project, not just from an observational perspective, but also from a modeling perspective, because the models that we use to actually understand the Arctic right now don't have very good parameterization of riverine inputs and the influence of rivers, and actually then collaborating with on this research cruise, and also with Paul and his team, that's allowed us to basically identify what these riverine end members are, and therefore to improve our models. So it's been a really big advantage.
I think, sorry, Guy, just to add to that, I think there's something here that's very important, and that's to do with the long-term nature of the relationships between the scientists. So I think, like Claire said about Bart, and also, I've been working in the Russian Arctic since 2010 now, when my postdoc supervisor sent me to Siberia for 3 months. And, some people would see that as a sentence, but it was absolutely amazing. But it is those relationships that we as the UK, I would say, but elsewhere, need to foster. We need to try and keep those long-term relationships going between organizations, and the UK is doing a great job of building better relationships and longer-term links with the Russian Arctic, and now emerging more with the Canadian Arctic as well. So that's really good, and it's been really strengthened by teams in Moscow and those places, like the Science and Innovation Network in the UK, and NERC office. So there's a piece in the Marine Biologist from Henry Burgess and Tatiana, and from the Science and Innovation Network team, and their role of keeping these dialogues going and allowing opportunities for Claire and myself and early career researchers to travel between countries to talk about how to work together and how to take samples and what are the important questions, and what's already been done in Russia. Lots of this literature is in Russian, and it's already been done. And so we need to, which is great, but we need to access that, and we need to know that we're not just repeating science. So that's pretty essential.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. If I could turn to you, Maria, there's a fascinating stories around Benjamin Lee Smith. Certainly, I'd never heard of him before I worked on this edition of the magazine, and the sort of incredible discoveries you made about him and about his exploration in the Arctic. I wonder if you could tell us a few of the highlights of his story.
Well, thank you very much. I was really actually fascinated by myself about this person. He's largely forgotten all over the world, and I started my introduction to Benjamin Lee Smith with I have been working in the French Joseph Land since 1992, and of course I tried to look for the old literature, for historical literature, and it was a common phrase through the publication in late 19th century. In 1880, it was an expedition of Scottish yachtsmen with a yacht Eire, and Eire sunk in the southern coast of French Joseph Land. That's it. And I was always wondering why Scottish yachtsman, what he was doing in high Arctic. And trying to learn this, I learned the story that this Scottish man was an Englishman, born in East Sussex, and he was not a yachtsman, and the Eire was not a yacht, it was a research vessel. It was a private research vessel purposely built for the Arctic exploration by Benjamin Smith. It was ice class vessel. So this is how the story began for me, for example. And of course, I read through the report to trying to retrieve some information on biodiversity. I found my ivory gull there. I found other animals there, and my colleagues, they put more attention to the Ira, which sank near the coast. And of course, the boys, they always look for some treasures and some shipwreck and whatever. So this how we started to follow this story and trying to dig out more information about this. And finally, we got into the communication with some relatives of Benjamin Smith. Unfortunately, his grandson, he was alive until very recently, but we were a little bit too late, and we made our discovery like a couple of years after he was died. But there is now other descendants of the Benjamin Smith. So we working at the Friends of the Plant, we work with the birds, again with the birds in the place where the Ira was died, where the Ira sunk. And for our project Open Ocean, we have a small vessel, Alter Ego, the motor sailor. And once we found by the navigation equipment, we found the sign on the bottom, and we knew that in this place it must be Ira. And this how we bring this this vessel to the surface, not by itself, but some artifacts and information. So we organized the ecological expedition, underwater expedition, and it was a very first expedition, successful expedition, surveying of underwater archaeological object in the Russian Arctic as a whole. And we found the shipwreck, and we found artifacts. We brought some artifacts and brought it to the museum. And we communicated with the other relative of Benjamin Smith, and they were amazed about this discovery, of course. And we are happy that the name of this person, who was largely forgotten because he was not a governmental person, he was a private person with a very strong passion to the discovery, to the travel, and finally to the Arctic. But he was the modest person. He never came to the public events. And he did not receive the Golden Medal of the Royal Geographical Society even. So he stayed at home, and the other people, they reported for them about his discovery. But he made a really very nice input into the further science. He had his first expedition, he had on board William Grant, who was the best photographer of his time in the Arctic. It was a private person, but he gathered a very bright scientific team on his vessel, and they brought collection to the Botanical Garden in London, the Kew Garden, yeah, and here to the Natural History Museum, and actually, he was one of the first person, not in the French discipline, but in the previous high Arctic expedition. He took Nansen bottle with him and bathymeter, and he made a survey of the water column from his rented vessel. And he was one of the first who find the penetration of warm water in the Arctic, warm water layer beyond the cold water layer. He found this, he discovered this, but because he was not a scientist, he received very, how to say, so the people didn't believe him. And they decided that he was wrong and his devices were not calibrated well and something like this. But they were calibrated. So this is a good example of what single person make a considerable input if he is dedicated to the something he know what to do, and he know how to look around, and he think about what he is what he's looking at. So we are really happy to bring this information, and we share this with a Russian audience, and we share this with a British audience, and thanks to the Marine Biologist, which allows us to make this information available in English, not only in Russian. And actually, we do hope to continue this this study because we had not only Benjamin Smith in our area, we have a much more much better prepared and longer expedition led by Jackson in Fringes of Land, and they made a very good publication after that. And our aim, our goal, our dream to make a bigger expedition following the traces of the British early explorer in Fringes of Land, and this will bring quite a nice and unique piece of information about environmental changes, because they have documented state of the environment after the archipelago just have been discovered.
It's amazing to have that baseline information coming back from the past for us, Maria. Thank you. I wonder if I could.
Yes, it's one small addition. And the shipwreck of the Ira, it's not only archaeological piece. It became oasis on the bottom. It's overgrown with a bottom community. It's a small kelp forest on Ira, and we know the age of this community, the exact age. So it's a good piece of information for the further exploration by the hydrobiologists.
Thank you, Maria. Fascinating, fascinating sort of reach into the past, but very relevant to the present. We have a question, and if I could put to the panel from Paul Dando. Are any studies being made to map methane concentrations in the Arctic Ocean in order to study the input due to increases in the breakdown of methane clathrates? Changes in the carbon isotope composition of organisms may also reflect this.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in quickly. So yes, there's lots of studies going on, not as part of mine, and I don't think as part of Claire's studies, but there certainly are, and there's a lot of extensive work, particularly at Stockholm University and elsewhere, led by Örjan Gustafsson and his team, that do a huge amount of mapping of the methane concentrations, particularly over the East Siberian Shelf region that we were discussing before. And they are using isotopic signatures to partition and determine where that's coming from. As part of my project, though, we have been also looking at methane and CO2 inputs from the rivers, again, to try and look at that end member. So if you're measuring a methane concentration in the coast, you want to be able to say, has that come from the seabed, from clathrate breakdown, or has it come from a signal in the river? And so we were looking at concentrations across these transects to identify how much is going out to the ocean, how much is going up to the atmosphere, and what is the isotopic signature of the methane. Exactly, yeah. But not of the clathrates, but of the methane that's being inputted from land.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. We have another one from Paul Dando. With Norway proposing to issue seabed mining licenses for hydrothermal minerals in 2023 and Russia mapping mineral resources for exploitation, what is being done to assess the likely effects of seabed mining on the Arctic ecosystem? And can throw that to anyone who'd like to have a go.
It sounds like a good research proposal, to be honest, but at the moment within the Changing Arctic Ocean programme, there is a benthic-focused project called CHAOS, and that programme is essentially looking at the benthic community within the Barents Sea and its impact on the cycling of carbon and nutrients, but also the impact of the changing ice conditions on the benthic community. They're not focusing specifically on seabed mining, but I would imagine that the information that they will get from that project will indicate the sensitivity of the benthic communities to changes, and also the interactions between the kind of the different types of the benthic community, whether it be above sediment, below sediment, the microbes, etc. So there is a lot of work being done on benthic communities within the Changing Arctic Ocean programme, but not necessarily linked to mining.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. We just have a couple of minutes left, so I'm sort of thinking of anything anyone would like to add that hasn't come up yet, or if anyone in the audience has a last question for us. So anyone, Paul, Claire, Maria, do you have any sort of little closing comments or anything you haven't covered yet?
Not huge. Question I had for Maria was around the photographer. Actually, I mean, an increasing thing that we're being asked to do is sort of show the changes that are going on in the Arctic, and all of the studies that we're doing as part of this program have global significance or potential global significance. So even though we live in the UK, nice and cozy, as you can see from the map in your magazine, you know, we are really very close to the Arctic. And we are likely to get influenced by it. So I think it'd be interesting to see, are those photographs available? And what do they look like?
Historical photographs, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You can see them in the publications. I mean, and they are available on the internet site of the Scots Polar Institute from their archive, and the big album of the photographs from Benjamin Smith is stored in the Royal Geographical Society archive. So, but if you Google for the William Grant Ranges of Land, so that you can find some of them on the internet.
Thanks, Maria. No, and then the last thing I would say is I think it's been an absolutely huge success so far from what I can see. The program, it's still ongoing, the Changing Arctic Ocean program, and of course, my wish as a scientist, as always, is that, you know, things like this will continue and we'll be able to capitalize on all the great work and collaborations that we've built so far.
Fantastic, thank you. And many of these programs have galleries of images that are available to browse on the internet. So Changing Arctic Ocean has images people can look at, and also the Mosaic program, which was a huge multinational Arctic research undertaking, has a fantastic gallery of images. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the collaborators in this edition of the magazine. Thank you all three of you for your wonderful articles, and everyone else that contributed to the magazine, and particularly to the UK Science Innovation Network in Russia and the NERC Arctic office, who supported us hugely in building this sort of network of people to put the magazine together. So thank you to Tatiana Iakloveva and Henry Burgess for their generous support. And really, that's all I'd like to say. Thank you, everyone who joined us this morning. Thank you very much to our panel for a fascinating discussion. Please feel free to contact me, the editor of the Marine Biologist magazine, if you have any questions or would like to know anything else. So once again, thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us, and I will sign off there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.